Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Jessie, and welcome back to another episode of Rewired to Inspire. This show where we'll dive into self-love, learn tangible ways to rewire the brain, and discovering your soul's purpose. The goal of Rewired to Inspire is to encourage listeners to begin doing the hard work, to get curious and open to maximizing your life. Our mindset shapes how we live. Depending on life events, traumas, and personal experiences, our mindsets are all vastly different. However, one thing we all have in common is the ability to rewire our mind, to change the narrative, and to pivot our lives. I hope you leave each episode with the belief that you are so worthy to live a life true to you. I look forward to chatting with you every single Tuesday and Thursday and helping you grow exponentially in all areas of your life. Without further ado, here's today's episode. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to my podcast, Rewired to Inspire. I am your host, Jessie Brown, and I am so excited to be jumping back on the mic with you all for episode number 77. I am super stoked today. Today is Friday. It's the day before my birthday. Life is good. I just came home from a great day with my coworkers, and honestly, I'm just feeling really good and excited to be jumping on the mic with you all today. So I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all having a great Tuesday. If you're listening to today's episode on Tuesday, or whenever you listen to today's episode, I hope that you're having a wonderful day. If you're not, I hope that this allows you to just forget about maybe some heaviness in your life for just a couple of moments and to just maybe pivot your thinking onto something else for a little while. And as always, I'm just so grateful for each and every one of you taking the time to tune in and to listen. It brings me so much joy every time I go in to see my downloads and I see that we are continuing to grow, continuing to reach new countries, which is just crazy. We just surpassed reaching 20 countries worldwide, which is honestly amazing and something that I can't even fully fathom thinking about, which is honestly so cool that my voice is being heard in so many places. So wherever you're tuning in from, whether we've met or we haven't met, just know I'm so thankful and so excited to have you here, and I would love to connect if we haven't already. So nonetheless, let's jump into number 77 for this week. And today's episode is one that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. And it's one that really brought me back to my social work brain of when I was studying to be a social worker. And for today's episode, we're going to be chatting all about why it's important to know your attachment style, why it's important to know how you respond and react to certain things, because oftentimes when we go through life without knowing these things, and it's so easy to not know them if you haven't studied them or if you've never been in a place to have learned them before. So if you've never gone to therapy or you've never had a counselor or you've never studied mental health, social work, things like that, these might be concepts and things that you've never heard of. And what I'm realizing is that through knowledge and through knowing these things, we're not only able to become better versions of ourselves, but we're also able to give ourselves permission for maybe why the way that we are, and to give ourselves a little bit of a deep breath, if you will, of if we respond to things in a certain way, of knowing that it's not really your fault. It isn't. It is in the way that we have control of our actions, but it isn't in the way that you were likely hardwired to be like that from childhood. And without knowing these things, it can be hard to change and pivot that. So my goal of today is to give you guys some awareness. I just need to take a little drink of water here. Oh, I had something in my throat. But my goal today is to give you guys some awareness, to give you guys maybe some pieces that you've never realized about yourself before, and to hopefully just allow you to take this into your life in whatever capacity in which you would like. And at the end of today's episode, I am going to be going through the benefits of knowing what your attachment style is, because obviously there would be no point of me sharing this with you all if there was no benefits to even knowing this information in the first place. So I first learned about attachment styles, again, like I said, when I was studying social work. And so I learned about this in my first year, I believe, and it was the first time that I had honestly ever been taught or shown anything like this. I knew that obviously, depending on how you grow up, depending on how your parents were, depending on how available they were emotionally, mentally, whatever, obviously that's going to shape how you grow up and who you become as an adult. But I never really realized the extent to which this goes. And so Attachment styles are something that was created by John, I always say his last name wrong. I remember even pronouncing it wrong when I was in school, Bowlby. And he really did a lot of work on this through a long period of time. I believe he began in 1907 and this continued through to the 90s. But this was largely discovered in the 1950s and 60s. So it really honestly hasn't been around that long to actually have this label onto it. And I think that I'm starting to see it more and more, which is amazing because it allows us to also realize when we know our attachment style, how not only we are as adults, but also how we might be passing that on to our children or our future children, and how we interact with every human being. Let's say your children are all grown up now and you're like, shoot, like I can't really change that. You can still work on yourself and you can still work on what your attachment style is and how you respond to certain situations. And the reason I really honestly felt pulled to share this with you guys is because it was derived from a personal experience. And I think like most of my podcast episodes are, it's what gives me the hunch of, okay, if I'm dealing with this in my life, it's likely that somebody else is as well. And so this largely came up because me and my partner, Mike, have polar opposite attachment styles. And I'm going to get into more of the definitions of what they are and what they look like. So just bear with me for a moment. But basically, his attachment style is known as an anxious attachment style. And my attachment style is known more as a dismissive attachment style. So basically, we'll often crash with each other when we're in conflict or when we're in the middle of, not agreeing on something, or if one of us is triggered, or if we're just in the heat of a moment. His response in those instances is that he needs a lot of validation. He needs to have somebody tell him everything's going to be okay. He enjoys when I'm very present. He enjoys physical touch in the way that if I give him a hug, it makes him feel really good. And for me, I'm honestly the complete opposite. When I'm dealing with confrontation, or I'm dealing with an argument, or I'm dealing with anything that triggers me or overwhelms me, I need as little stimulation as possible. So I want to be in a room by myself, listening to really calm music or just doing deep breathing. And so we were crashing a lot in the beginning of our relationship because we didn't know this about each other. And without knowing that, of course, you're just going to think that the other person doesn't care about you or isn't respectful of you or doesn't understand you, when in retrospect, it wasn't that at all. We just didn't know what each one of us needed individually in those moments. And now that we know that, Mike knows that when I get triggered, I need a little bit of space. I know when he's triggered, he needs reassurance and he needs me there to support him. But for the first couple months of our relationship, we struggled a lot because we just always felt like the other person was attacking us and making us feel really crummy, when that was never neither of our intentions. We were just showing love in the way that we knew how to and what felt safe for us. Because for me to go and give physical touch or to give a hug or to give a kiss or whatever, when I'm triggered, that would make me way more overwhelmed. And him perceiving that without knowing that would be that he thinks that I don't love him, right? So you can really just see that just in that example. This happens all the time in all of our different relationships. We all respond to things differently and need different things in those times. And that's why it's so important for us to know our attachment style so we're able to communicate that. We're able to say, hey, when I'm triggered or when I'm feeling a certain type of way, this is what I'm needing. And whenever we're able to identify something and express what we're needing, we're validating that for ourselves. We're giving ourselves that sense of self-love and self-validation. And we're also allowing that other person to then have the permission to do with that what they will. Because if that person knows that, let's say, for example, Mike knows that I need distance and he decides to not do that and decides to, in my perspective, smother me, he knows that that's going to lead to me likely lashing out, because we all have a tolerance in which we can take things. And yes, there's times when we're both triggered and we kind of both have to come to a middle ground of, okay, I can't completely shut him out because he also needs a little piece of me. And so it's really just about opening those doors and opening that conversation. And even if you've been with your partner, I've been with Mike for a little over a year now. And even if you've been with your significant other for years, these can still be conversations that can be had, because I truly don't think it's ever too late. And I do think it's never too late to work on your relationship and to work on your communication, to be able to express what you need in certain instances. So even if you've been married for 20 years and you're like, oh, my partner knows me better than anybody, do you feel like they could, though, potentially support you more because maybe you don't even really realize what you need in those moments? And maybe what you've been doing has just kind of been working, but maybe it could be working more optimally than what it is. And so I just wanted to share that with you all, a little bit of a personal story, because I remember in my last relationship, I definitely didn't have this on my radar, even though I knew what they were. We never talked about our attachment styles. We never talked about what we needed in certain instances. And I'm realizing now, reflecting back, the reason that it worked out so good is because we had the same response. So we both needed space. We both needed to take some time. So of course, neither one of us ever really felt over triggered because we were both doing what each of us needed, if that makes sense. So when we're really going to see the issues, and these two particular ones, the anxious and dismissive, are the two that clash the most. Because one wants to get close, one wants to pull away. So we can really see how those can be the trickiest to work with, but it can be done. And it can be done through love, validation, connection, communication, and just laying it out on the table of, it's not you of why I want to withdraw. It's because of everything that I've experienced in my life that for me just isn't safe in that moment. So you might be wondering, if you haven't already guessed it, where do attachment styles come from? Where and how is this developed? They're largely developed based on experiences early in our life, based on our caregivers, based on things we witnessed, based on the love that we received during certain instances, right? So we're all going to have different experiences. I do believe, however, that this also extends a little bit out of childhood. I do think that largely they are based there, but a part of me truly does believe that depending on your first couple of relationships that you experience in your life, this can also change. Just the same as we can work on our attachment styles later in life, because I know that I have a dismissive attachment style and I know the things that I do when I'm feeling a certain type of way, but that doesn't mean that I can't work on it. So I also believe that over time our attachment style can change depending on an event or situation in which we go through. Right? So that is one thing to remember, that they largely stem from childhood, but they can also be formed and or increased depending on relationships that we have. So now I want to take you guys through each of them, what they are, what they're called, what they mean, so that you can maybe start to identify the one in which you resonate the most with. So the first one that I'm going to break down for you guys is a secure attachment. So a secure attachment might look like somebody who's confident. They're very resilient. They're easy to love. They're easy to trust others. They feel safe. They're comfortable letting people in. They're just all around just seem kind of calm and don't really worry about the worst case scenario. And as a child, as a secure attachment, the child might become upset when their caregiver leaves. And however, they respond positively to contact and seek comfort when frightened. So these are basically our children that when the caregiver leaves, they become upset, but they seek comfort. They will seek that. They're very independent in the way that they will go to other people to express what they need. So that is what a secure attachment is. Pretty much the polar opposite to that is an avoidant or dismissive. So I was saying earlier that I am a dismissive attachment style. This is also called an avoidant attachment style. So basically, if you are avoidant or dismissive, you often struggle with closeness, you're over independent, you're emotionally distant, you're likely unresponsive. You're really just almost like you have a wall in front of you, especially at times of dealing with conflict. And so children that have an avoidant or a dismissive attachment style might disregard affection from their caregivers, and they tend to show aggression when among other children. So basically, in my mind, from my perception, a child who has a really hard time staying in their window of tolerance, has a really hard time regulating their emotions, is very easily disrupted based on the circumstances and the situations in which surround them. The next attachment style is an anxious attachment style. So this is the one that I said that Mike was largely. So an anxious attachment style is basically someone who's emotionally volatile. They fear rejection. They're anxious. They can seem clingy. They seek constant reassurance. As children, anxious attachment styles The children tend to be very sensitive and responsive to others' needs, often at the expense of their own. They experience distress when their parents leave and have a difficult time to soothe when their parents return. So basically, with an anxious attachment style, you have a really hard time with unpredictability. And so you reassure that for yourself by needing constant reassurance, by needing validation, by seeking comfort. You get really distressed as a child when your parents were to leave, and when they return, you still kind of remain distressed. It can be really, really hard sometimes to fully comfort somebody with an anxious attachment style, because a lot of it does come from within internal belief that you might feel like you're not worthy of receiving that. And so I know for Mike specifically, he feels this largely whenever our relationship seems a little bit rocky or seems a little bit, we're having a harder day. I really see this come through with him because he'll be really anxious. He'll need constant reassurance. I can just tell he's not doing well. And no doubt that's his nervous system and his mind telling him, we've felt this before and we need to protect ourselves. So if we don't get that validation, something might be really, really wrong. And then, so those are basically the 3 attachment styles. But what they've done is they created a 4th one, which is basically a disorganized, fearful attachment style. And that is basically a combination of the anxious attachment style and the avoidant attachment style together. And honestly, this is the one that I resonate with the most, as much as I definitely resonate with the avoidant one. I really, really resonate with this one. So basically what this means is that you have a fear of connection, you have likely poor boundaries, you have extreme responses. So basically you go from feeling super, super hot to super cold, super happy, super sad. Basically you're just flip-flopping between 2 extremes of emotions. And children with disorganized, fearful attachment styles tend to be fearful and express ambivalent behaviors towards their parents. Right? So anger or aggression without an obvious reason, a little bit of unpredictability, perhaps freezing in front of your parents. You typically go to your parents as a sense of safety, but they might also be a sense of fear for you. And so there's really just a lot of unsureness when it comes to this attachment style. And it's basically just that 1 foot in, 1 foot out, too hot, too cold, I don't know, unsafe, safe, unsafe. It's just really, really unsure. And these to me are the nervous systems that honestly seem to be the most distressed, because of course, if your mind and your body are on different pages and you're constantly just at, a fight with your external environment and you just don't feel safe anywhere, of course it makes sense that it's going to be really hard to feel secure in your relationships, because you're just constantly not going to know which direction in which to turn. So as promised at the beginning of today's episode, you might be wondering, okay, great, I know the attachment styles now. I heard a little bit about your personal story. Why would I want to know all this? And so if it wasn't already obvious why you should know all this, there are so many reasons. It gives you awareness. It gives you permission to know maybe why you feel things the way that you do. It allows you to have open communication with those in your life. And the thing about having a healthy relationship, not only with yourself, but as well as with others, is that it requires you to know who you are and what you need. We often go into relationships, and when they don't fulfill or act in a way in which we think that they should have or we think we deserve, we will often lash out at that and push that blame onto somebody else. But at the end of the day, it's our our responsibility as individuals to be able to express what we need. If I'm not able to express, hey, when I'm triggered, I know that I need time to just go sit, calm myself down, and I just can't have a lot of stimulation in those moments. But if I wasn't able to communicate that, and then Mike was maybe being super loving or super, wants to talk and hang out, he wouldn't understand why I would maybe get angry or upset. And so we have to be able to communicate those things with other people, as well as to give ourselves that self-validation of maybe why our body responds in certain ways to certain things. The second reason is because understanding your relationship attachment style can help guide your thoughts about what is needed for a healthy relationship, and why sometimes relationships seem frustrating or difficult, or why you might feel like they don't understand you. So again, I chatted on that piece a little bit earlier, but it's so important, especially in our relationships, to know our attachment styles, because it can allow us to, again, really express things, but to feel more like they understand you. And this is also a very important conversation to have with somebody. If you maybe haven't had kids together yet, but you plan to, this can really dip into what your parenting style is going to be. Because if you both have polar opposite attachment styles, how are you going to come together when it's time to have children to ensure that those things are delivered as best as possible, not to duplicate a negative traumatic cycle for another generation of children? The third reason why it's so important that we know this is because it can validate your emotions and your childhood experiences so that you can begin to work on them. So I know for the first time that I learned about this, I just had a lot of internal anger about, my childhood and feeling like, okay, well, why is it that I wasn't given a lot of validation? Why is it that I often felt alone and like I had to protect myself and I had to, hide all the time? Why did I have so much unpredictability? Why did I feel like the world was always unsafe? And so for a long time, I just got really, really angry. And that obviously helped going to therapy and talking about that and getting it off my chest and learning new things and realizing also that my parents were doing the best to their ability, to which they were also shown how to love and show affection. And so you can see how the cycle of attachment styles will continue unless we do the work on them. But it largely allows you to validate for yourself your own emotions and how you're feeling, to be able to give that permission to yourself. Because I know for the first time when I read that, and I was like, oh, I'm like this for a reason. Like I was just able to take a deep breath and kind of give myself a little deeper level of self-love, of validating experiences that I went to that have led to me to be like this, not just I'm like this because I chose to be. But it is my responsibility to do the work on it. But it does start with knowing what your attachment style is and validating for yourself of where that has potentially came from. So basically, you guys, the bottom line is that your relationship style and your attachment styles exist because of experiences that you've had, right? And it's important that we honor that for ourselves, but also know that with work and proper support and love, you can improve and change how you deal with certain situations. Just like anything in life, as we bring the awareness and we get the tools and we do the work and we just start to have a deeper understanding of things, it allows us to see the world a little bit differently. It allows us to see ourselves differently, to see our relationships differently, and to also ask ourselves if we feel like there's been a pattern in our relationships, because I do definitely resonate with that as well, where for so long I was attracting the same type of people in my life who likely all had the same attachment style, but that also meant that we had very similar wounds and very similar traumas. And so that can also be toxic if you're kind of with somebody who has very similar wounds as you, because it can be hard to heal in that space. But just knowing that it's more empowering to know your attachment style than to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. So I encourage you to take some time. There is so many quizzes that you can do online. If even after reading this, you're unsure of which one you might be, you can literally just go on Google and type in attachment style quiz. There's so many of them out there. Land on what yours is, figure it out, read on it, study it, figure out tips and tricks to work with what your attachment style is, what you might need in those moments. It really is with anything in mental health. It's about finding something that aligns and resonates and beginning to go down that path, right? There's so many miscued things out there and things that just don't resonate and make us feel less than because we feel like, we don't relate to it. So find what yours is, relate to it, maybe find other people with similar attachment styles and chat with them on their experiences, what works for them when they're triggered, and we can really just begin to harmonize and work together on this. So I truly, truly hope you guys enjoyed today's episode about attachment styles. I want to share more mental health stuff like this and just awareness, because I do realize that to me, this is just second knowledge of knowing these things. And to me, I'm like, of course, everybody knows that they have an attachment style. But I'm realizing that that's actually very far from the truth, and a lot of us don't realize that. And so if I can just give any ounces of permission and knowledge and education through my podcast, that is exactly my goal and reason why I started this in the first place. So thank you guys so much as always. Happy Tuesday. I hope you're having a great day. All the love, you guys. Until next time. Bye, you guys. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's episode of Rewire to Inspire. I absolutely love connecting with you all, so make sure you're following me on Instagram. I am at JessieBrown13. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a review or share with someone you think would enjoy. I look forward to chatting with you all next episode. And remember, get out of your head and into your heart.